systems. We gave it a much broader look to understand the landscape.
Thank you. And from the sort of the broader state IT perspective, where I've spent a good portion of my career, one of the biggest challenges we see in sort of transformational IT projects is the lack of sort of business process analysis or firm understanding of your business processes and what it means when you move to a COTS product, because sort of by definition, you're going out and you're buying what a vendor asserts is a package of best practices in the industry. And the challenge, and I'm not suggesting that you all don't have a good handle on your business processes, but what the challenges we've seen in other state departments is they're not always fully prepared to accept the level of business process change it requires to move yourself into a COTS model. And then it's sort of a downstream effect of that. They want to overly modify a COTS product to sort of make it back into automating their current business processes. And then we've sort of broken the idea of a COTS because we've now modified it so far that we've taken ourselves out of that COTS benefit, which is the updates and enhancements from vendors, because we're so modified, we're sort of out of that loop. So if you could just talk a little bit about your views on business process analysis, where it fits into the and business process reengineering, and where it fits into your procurement plan and implementation approach, and what you're doing as an organization to deal with that change to the extent there is change.
And if you could avoid acronyms, because you guys are talking
COTS
to each
and
other.
MOTSs?
Oh. You guys are.
I know what it is.
I did explain
Talk
that
about
COTS is a custom off-the-shelf system, and a MOTS is a modified off-the-shelf system. It basically says, are you buying Quicken, and you're putting all of your tax information into Quicken and expecting it to yield you a product that may or may not meet all of your own personal needs. So, Richard, I'm glad that you asked that question, because it sounds like you've probably been inside many of the conversations that we've had within the organization about those very issues. First, we have not done business process reengineering at this point, although we know we need it, because we don't know what efficiencies the solution will bring. And we want to make sure that we do that business process reengineering once we know what the workflow, what the logical path is in a new system. So that's something that we'll be taking a very careful look at. And we will be looking to avoid as much customization as possible, recognizing that customization is unavoidable. And all the systems come prepared with the understanding, all of the vendors provide a system that anticipates that there's a core bones that all systems do. They receive information, they store that information during the lifetime of the member, and they pay benefits, and they account for beneficiaries, and there are a few other core processes. So those all standardize pretty much, but how you run your business will change based on the vendor that we choose, which is in part why we're trying to do that readiness assessment with our staff. We'll get into what the real changes are going to be once we understand who our vendor is, and that will be part of our negotiation in terms of how much is their product instantly implementable, if you will, and how much of it requires customization. Secondly, we have developed a very extensive requirements matrix for this project. We went through and identified all portions of the law that have a requirement associated with it. We've mapped requirements to that. We've mapped requirements for all of our business areas. We've identified where our current system has inconsistent business practices, and we have a plan in place to address all of those processes. And probably the key example that is the most obvious that I use on a regular basis in describing this is that in START, our current system, when we developed it, because we developed it in organizational silos, we didn't come up with a rounding convention. So some systems some aspects of the system round to 3 decimal places, 4 decimal places, infinite decimal places. Some show maybe 3 decimal places on the system, but their actual calculation behind it is 4 or 5 decimal placement systems. When you shift someone from one benefit type to another or one status to another, and there's a rounding difference, we come up with a different value. Is the value right or wrong? Is the first one better? Is the second one better? We don't know. They're both not incorrect. They're both correct. It's just a question of being off by a few cents. We don't want that to exist in our new system. There needs to be one rounding convention. I don't care what it is at this point, but it needs to be the same for all of our calculations. So we're trying to address all of those kinds of issues. We've been sharing that information with the vendor community so they come in knowing exactly what our business is. We also anticipate the new system will be built on business rules and tables. So we then have control whenever there's a change, so we can make a change to that business process. And by giving us that flexibility, we eliminate some of the challenge that we have in our current environment, where in order to produce a report, in order to make any change, in order to really use the system for intelligence gathering, the business people need IT support. And that's really not how we want to operate our system in the future. And so all of the new systems come with robust reporting packages, with good management information, with good controls around that process. So I can't anticipate that we would ever be in a situation like we are today, where the maintenance of the system is so burdensome and challenging for us and not very flexible. I mean, that's clearly what we're trying to avoid in this process.
That's great. It sounds like you put a lot of thought and planning into this, so you're probably in a pretty good position going forward, so that's comforting. I would just encourage you, as you move forward, to really focus on your change management within the organization and those people that will actually be using the system, get them involved early, often, and throughout the process, because in the end, they're going to be the ones that really make or break the system, and we all want it to be successful, and you need your end users engaged and champions of the system so that, they have a vested interest in making it work. And
Absolutely. I agree with you completely. And that's why we're doing those pre-readiness assessments now, to find out what people's capacity or anticipation is of the change and how ready are they. And we have a very good model for doing that and for looking at the information that's coming back. And I have had the opportunity to look at the feedback from my first business area. And we're asking every single person in the business areas, every single person, what their feelings are about the changes that are coming. And I was very encouraged that when I read the initial report, what I was hearing was that staff are very concerned about three things. They're concerned that we not do this in a way that harms members. They're concerned that we not be driven more by schedule than by quality. And they're concerned that we learn from the mistakes we made in the past. And those are the very issues that we've been having at the policy level discussions with Business Renew all along, that we want to not replicate problems from the past, but build from successes that were ours or others, and that we want to engage our staff and make sure they're adequately trained and prepared to use the system when we turn it on, and that it actually offers us better service to members.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers to Richard's questions. He asked the questions a lot better than I could have, but I had the same questions, but without all the acronyms and experience behind them. So, and I appreciate the answers, because those were the answers I was hoping you were going to give. My one last question, though, is on the budget. When you were making your presentation, you were talking about budget change to accommodate for the making sure that the system that we have currently is operable while we're transitioning to the new system. And so I'm wondering, how is the budget being developed, do you have a sense of the cost right now? I know one of the things you just said was we want to make sure that we don't rush things so that we get quality, and in my mind that sounds good, but it also sounds like delays and budget increases. So how is the budget being developed, and do we have a budget now, and how certain are we that we're going to be able to do this within some kind of a reasonable budget, and how do we control for that?
So there's two things. One is the cost of implementation, which I really don't have yet, because we don't know what the vendor community is going to come back with in terms of proposals, and the review of the cost analysis of the proposals is far into the RFP evaluation process. And so if I give you a number today, I mean, we've had conversation about it. We know the range that other systems have experienced. But I know we have many vendors listening in, so I don't want to give a target that they then think, oh, okay. So I want to be very careful about
Right.
how I say that. But on the floor where my project management team exists a matrix that is almost the size of your display screen behind you that identifies the resource needs projected out for the life of the project, that identifies it by business area. So we're really trying to understand what it will take from the business sides, and that's not just business and benefits and services, it's business throughout the organization, people who are impacted by the project. What is the resource commitment that we're going to need in order to do that? And then talking with the business areas about the impact of pulling those experienced resources, how can we do that, and how can we backfill behind them? So you will see a series of budget change proposals coming before you every year that address the staffing needs that we're anticipating for the project. Rather than try and bring them all on board at once, we're going to bring them in phases because that's how we're going to need them as the project matures through implementation. We have adequate resources already identified for this next year, which is really the RFP finalization year. But implementation will start in 14-15, and that's the year that we're asking for additional resources. And that's a budget item that you'll be seeing in September and again in November. So, we've established a process for our Business Renew projects for how we will ask for funding and how we will account for that funding. So we have already developed a mechanism for us to use. Obviously you have responsibility for final approval of the budget before it goes to the legislature for adoption. So we will be bringing all of those budget decisions back before you, but they will come before you in the context of Business Renew, not just in the context of this individual project separately. I mean, they'll be all listed out, so you'll see what the resource commitment is. But we are starting with part of our EPIC budget and building a way for us to continuously utilize unspent funds in the future. So I think we have a good understanding and a good plan of what it's going to take for us internally to do that, what the amount of staff is that we're going to need in order to make sure that we keep the lights on work going and that we adequately staff the project.
Great, thank you.
All right, any further questions?
I just want to make a comment, actually. Just from the board side of this, Peggy's obviously done a great job of presenting all the work that's going on within the building. But from the board's perspective on this, I guess particularly for the controller and the treasurer, we really would appreciate your governance insights. I assume you've had good and bad moments reviewing our sister systems large-scale projects, so you've learned from that what worked and what didn't work with the board, and the frequency and the depth of information, what works. We obviously don't want to turn you into technology analysts as well, but because of the dollars involved, we also need you close enough that you got the right governance structure. So we can do that offline or whatever works, but I know you've had an awful lot of conversations about this over the years, and that would help us as well. And then board members have come in and out of this process at different time periods. Dana has been through several systems, so she sees from the member side kind of what has worked and what hasn't worked as START was implemented. But some of you, and before START, but not that ledger in the.
No, not quite that.
that, yeah.
I was two right before
Yeah.
START was implemented.
But seriously though, we really do want to do personalized education for you. If anyone doesn't feel they have what it takes knowledge-wise to hear these reports from either Peggy or Graham coming up in a minute, that's real important that we fill in those gaps for you. And clearly when the governor finishes his appointments, we've got some work to do with those other three members.
All right, anything else? All righty, Chris, I think it's time for you to come up. Thank you, Peggy. Morning, Graham. All righty, we've skipped to item 10.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And here from our regular independent oversight report. On this month, we're actually reporting on 4 projects. There's a new project in addition to the 3 that we reported on previously. The new one is Enterprise Information Management, which Peggy mentioned briefly. So I'll give an overview of that as well as discuss the current status of the project. So let's move right into CALM. So the CALM project has 2 sort of major streams of activity running right now. The first is the continued stabilization of the Release 1 software in production. That continues. I think that if you remember at the last meeting, we'd had some sort of conversations around what stabilization really meant and how the project exits stabilization. That activity is still underway right now. What I wanted to do was show you just a sort of a snapshot of one of the things we talked about last time is when trying to define really what a stabilization period is and how you decide when you exit stabilization. It comes down to the point that from a production support perspective, you're operating in pretty stable production mode, and the number of problems that are coming up, trouble tickets and so on, has reached sort of a stasis level, and you're able to support that on an ongoing basis. What I just want to flick to quickly and then flick back is a snapshot of the volume of tickets for CALM over the months since they went live in January. And this is sort of a fairly typical graph, I would say, and that you see when the project, there was a soft launch in January, so there wasn't a huge amount of activity in January. But then in February, an awful lot of tickets being opened as people started to use the system, and people were trying to sort of resolve issues, and there was sort of a backlog created, and then that backlog starts to get worked off as the production support organization ramps up. You'll see a bit of a tick up in May that has a relationship with the quarter end activity. What we would anticipate is that will sort of go down a bit this month, and then we'll tick up again once we get to year end close. The question for the project, which the project doesn't really have a final answer at this point, is at what point do they exit stabilization? Like, when is done, and does the project really finish for Release 1, and you're just running Business Direct? That's something the project's talking about right now to try and come up with a concrete definition of how you really exit stabilization and you're done. It's going to be several months yet, I think, for at least relating to the year-end close activities, which is the next point I want to talk about. CALM Release 1.5 is the set of software that was not able to be implemented with Release 1 in January, and so it's being implemented in increments over the spring. There have been some continued resource contentions with the stabilization activities, because some of the people who are doing production support for Release 1 are the same people who are working on quality assurance and testing for the Release 1.5 items. Release 1.5 is still somewhat behind schedule. It was last time we talked to you, and if you remember when we talked last time, I'd said that one of the risks that was coming up was a potential risk with the ability to meet the schedule for the year-end close items. That risk is very much still there, and I think you might have talked about this in the ARM committee a little bit. The status of that and the way that CALM support to the year-end close process works is there are a set of 18 software objects that are part of the system that need to be complete to support the full year-end close activities. And those 18 software objects were part of the Release 1.5 scope. And those are things that have been in progress and being implemented over the last number of months. And those are the things that the team is trying to get completed to support the year-end close activities. There are reports and things like that that will help, with the year-end close process. Of those 18 objects, 3 are finished in production today, another 3 are ready to go into production, and the last 12 are in various stages of development and testing. There are daily status meetings that the project is having from now through the end of the month to track those 18 items. They're pretty much the top priority for the team right now, and so they're really focusing all energies on getting those items completed to be ready for year-end close. To the extent they've actually shelved any planning work on Release 2 until the 1.5 delays are addressed. So that's basically been put on hold so that's all hands on deck for Release 1.5. Our estimation is that the team will probably be ready to start close activities on time. They're already in the process of planning a dry run activities. So for the pieces that are finished, they're doing a dry run of the year-end close activities so that when they get to the real year-end close, it's not the first time they're trying to do it. But there will be some elements of that year-end close process that the first time they will execute those elements is when they're doing it for real. And whenever you run software for the first time in production, you're almost inevitably going to run into some problems. So while I think they probably will start on time, it's an open question about whether they'll be able to finish on time, and it's almost guaranteed it'll be a big sink of resources for the July, August, September timeframe. So that's clearly something that both we and the project team are focusing a lot of attention on right now. It's pretty much the number one priority for the project. And it probably won't be until closer to the end of the month that we have a really clear picture of what the solution is going to look like on July 1 and what's really going to be there. It'll come on pretty soon after that if it's not ready on July 1. But what it's going to mean is that the year-end close process is going to be a lot of work for everybody. I don't think it's going to necessarily be a clean process, and it's very hard to predict at this point how long it's going to take and whether it's really going to get completed in the timeline that everybody has originally planned. So, any questions about that?
Paul?
Yes, thank you. You're right. We did talk about this at Audit and Risk Management yesterday, and there was a presentation by staff about the possibility that there would be a delay that could, in particular, delay the consideration of the financial statements at the November board meeting. But I guess, and maybe Robin would like to, because I think yesterday, I think we're hearing a little bit more specificity from Graham about the reasons for the delay, which I don't think came up yesterday, and I want to make sure that the perspective that the two of you have as to why there might be a delay is similar and not two different reasons, because Graham seems to be suggesting that it has to do with these 18 elements of CARM 1.5 that have been delayed, and that the delay in their completion and the uncertainty about their being able to be tested before we actually have to do the close is the reason that there could be a delay. Is that what you were telling us yesterday, or is there another reason as well?
So my commentary at ARM was really based on our experience in closing the third quarter where we don't have these objects ready. So my estimates in terms of the impact are really based on the absence of those objects, which happen to be reports that would enable us to do some things faster. So in planning, we're planning using a contingency approach where those are not ready. I will update. I don't know that Graham realizes this, but we're about 2/3 of the way through the year-end rehearsal with the basic SAP tools that are available to close procurement budgets and the general ledger. So we've already passed the budget close and the procurement close steps, and we're now into the GL close steps, just making sure that those SAP configuration items are ready. There are tickets coming out of that, so there are problems with those that are getting corrected and resolved. But the 18 objects are primarily what we call Bob J reports. So they're reporting tools that will allow us to do analytics in a different way than we were able to do for the third quarter, which would in fact help us be faster rather than slower if they are available. But our plans are based on them not necessarily being there. So in other words, we generated the third quarter without them.
Thank you. That helps clarify. Yeah.
Any further questions on CARM?
Okay.
Great. You for data prep?
Actually, pension is
Okay.
next. So for pension solution, again, you can think of the pension solution project running on a couple of different tracks. The first being the development of the procurement methodology and the approach to the actual procurement, and the second being the execution of the test steps necessary to complete the procurement on the schedule, on the timeline that have been planned. We've had pension solution in green status all the way along. We're looking at downgrading that to yellow plus for this period, not because of the methodology, because we're actually very supportive of the approach that the project is taking. And I think, Peggy talked to it a little bit earlier, and we concur. I think the RFI process that the project has gone through, we think was a success. And the approach that's being put together for the actual procurement, we think is a pretty good one, and we think does address many of the risks that a lot of the large IT procurements here in California and in other states run into, because some of the sort of traditional issues around lack of understanding in both the vendor and the client community about what each other's needs are and what the capabilities are, and there's sort of a learning process that happens after the contract is signed a lot of the time, and that's where you get into issues where you've already got a contract signed, price is agreed to, schedule is agreed to, and now all of these new facts are coming out. The project is doing everything it can to educate both themselves and the vendor community prior to the contract being completed, so that risk is minimized. They're also putting in place some steps through the procurement process and the contract management process to try and balance flexibility, where there are things you don't know and you can't know until you get started. But how do you maintain control over the contract in the absence of full information? So I think they're doing some pretty good things along those lines that will become apparent when the RFP comes out. So we feel pretty supportive about the actual process and approach they're taking. Where the concern is that the schedule is slipping and has continued to slip over the last couple of months. There are a couple of issues that have driven that. One is an outstanding question around the relationship between the pension solution and business renew. And the RFP really can't be finalized until that question is resolved. It was meant to be done in May. It wasn't. There's a meeting actually next week, which is intended to resolve it. But that has pushed back that decision and is having impact on the procurement schedule. It's also possible that some of the internal timelines for internal quality reviews within CalSTRS may end up being longer than originally anticipated. So the bottom line is it's very difficult for the team to even forecast an RFP release date right now. It had been planned for early July. That's not going to happen. It's going to be later than that, but nobody can quite say how later. And it won't be possible to really forecast a real date until some of these issues are resolved. So that's why we have the sort of rated as a yellow plus now, because of the uncertainty of the schedule. Our focus in the next coming weeks is really validating that the project can resolve that relationship. That's sort of probably the big question that remains to be answered around the way the solution is structured and defines the scope of the RFP. So again, that's meant to be resolved in the next week or two. We'll see whether it is. Validating the project has a workable schedule that they can really plan. And it's important not just to give some sort of certainty to the team, but also there are many other projects that are going on across the organization, and they need to have some certainty about the use of resources so they don't unnecessarily or accidentally impact other projects that may be thinking they have access to people and then they don't because their procurement hits. And then the last piece, something that the project is really starting to work on in earnest now, is the evaluation strategy for the RFP. So this is when the proposals come in. How do you pick a winner? What's the criteria you use? How do you judge whether somebody's made a good proposal or not? How do you weight the different aspects of the proposal, cost and staffing and technical approach and so on? And we think that's a very important thing. It's really an expression of the priorities of the organization, like what's really important to the organization, and you get a lot of that out through the evaluation strategy. So we've been involved, to date in all these conversations. We'll continue to be involved as that evaluation strategy is defined and really completed over the next month or so. And that, we think, is a particularly important thing that can help. Obviously, it has a very direct impact on who gets picked, but it's also a very good exercise for making sure that the organization is aligned and all feel the same ways about what the priorities are and what's going to be important in a winner. So any questions on pension?
Richard?
Thank you. Can you expand a little bit on this issue about the relationship between pension solution and business? What is the issue there that needs to be resolved?
So there's a couple, and it really relates to what the appropriate entry point is for employer reporting as well as cash management. And there was some interim solutions put in place when CALM was implemented that established a relationship with START as the existing pension system. But it was always recognized that those were not sort of the final position on how the different interfaces should work, both externally coming into the organization and then internally within CalSTRS, what the division of responsibilities would be. And it's a pretty complicated topic. And it's taken longer than anticipated to basically get all the parties together to sort of think through all the different options and then get to a meeting where they can hash it out. The end result of it will be a definition of really what's in scope for pension solution and what's not, and then whether the business direct scope stays the same or whether there are any modifications to that, either additions or subtractions.
It seems like that would be something that we would have identified earlier on in the first project. Is there a reason it's like, seems like an awkward time to be making a decision on this, but maybe I'm just not understanding the dynamic.
Yeah, it's something that's been recognized as an issue for, I would say, probably 18 months or more. And there's been various stages of discussions. But part of the issue was that the organization didn't want to make a decision on sort of a target in advance of knowing what the marketplace was like for pension solutions, what pension solutions actually provided. And so there was a certain, we need to figure out what the market can provide on the pension solution arena before we start directing the market about what we want to see within scope, because we don't want to say we want X and then the market says, well, we don't actually do that. The project knows now what the marketplace looks like. So they have sort of those facts in hand. So it's sort of the right time in a way, in that the internal team is pretty much fully informed on what the marketplace has to offer, but you haven't put the RFP out on the street yet, so you're still able to sort of shape the scope. So this is sort of the right time in that sense, but because there's been a delay in just getting to having those conversations, it's pushing out the RFP date.
So the decision will be made before the RFP goes out. We won't send an RFP out with a contingency bid type
Exactly.
option. Okay.
Yes, and that's what the project is trying to avoid, because it'll make it a very complicated procurement if they
Right.
try to do that.
Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you. So with regard to the schedule, I may be hearing different things from different people, but I think I'm hearing three different things about the schedule. I think you said that the RFP was supposed to go out in July, but at this point, we don't really know when the RFP will go out. Peggy said the RFP is going to go out in about a year.
She meant something different.
It will be, we'll have the evaluation done in a year.
Okay,
The
okay.
RFP will be going out July, August, remember I talked about months and weeks, not.
Okay.
That's for the release of the RFP. We anticipate it'll take a full year for all of the evaluation processes to take place.
Okay, okay. So is it, so but Graham, are you, you're saying we're behind schedule or not that we're behind schedule?
We're behind the original schedule of when the organization planned to release the RFP,
Okay,
because that was intended to be going out, in a month or so. That almost certainly won't happen at this point. There's a process that kicks in once the RFP is released, and then you go through the whole process of the vendors. After, there's a set of dialogues with the vendor community,
Right.
there's write the proposals received, evaluate the proposals, pick an intended awardee, come to the board. And that's the point that Peggy was talking about. We're coming back to the board in about a year's time to say, we're ready to award a contract.
but so we're not like a delayed in it by a year and.
No.
we're
It's a
delayed-
matter of, 6-8 weeks, something like that. Part of the issue is this, I can't tell you how much it is, because we don't really have the schedule in place, and that's sort of the uncertainty that's unsettling. It's not going to be many months, but it's, a month or two, that order of magnitude.
So there was an original schedule that we're,
A high-level schedule,
a high-level schedule?
yes.
Okay.
And what the team's
Again,
been trying to do is to blow that down into the detailed tasks.
Right.
But without some of this resolution, it's very hard to do that, because there's some uncertainties that they can't resolve.
Right, because the third source was that Jack's executive director's report said it's on schedule. So I'm just trying, I mean, and if we're talking about 6 weeks, I don't think we're talking about material differences that are severe risks to the project. Right, but I guess my feeling, my question is, does this board have a schedule that we can kind of, measure the progress against, so that we know, because if each few months there's another delay of, 4 to 6 weeks, and Graham says he's not really sure he knows when the RFP will go out. Richard raised the question about this unresolved issue that has been worked on for 18 months but still hasn't been resolved. I'm just wondering, do we have a benchmark against which to really measure progress? Because, if it's cumulative, different delays, then it becomes significant, and it becomes potentially a lot more costly, which is what I think, we want to avoid.
And what we've really been looking for, and I mean, and there are valid reasons why the project hasn't really been able to put a detailed schedule together right now, because it's there's a learning process. You're figuring out how big is the box, and but a lot of those, if you think back 2 or 3 months ago, there were a series of unanswered questions, and there was a list, and those have been getting ticked off, week by week. Okay, know the answer to that one, know the answer to that one, know the answer to that one. There's only a couple left. This business renew pension solution being the biggest one. So at the point that those, are answered, then, okay, we sort of know how big the box is now. There's really no reason not to have a detailed schedule that really blows everything out. And so it's at that point that you say, okay, now we do need to have the same kind of schedule discipline and rigor that we anticipate for all the other projects, because we sort of scoped it down now, and there's less uncertainty. And so what I would hope, certainly by the next time we see each other, is that will be in place. We'll be able to have, we'll be able to treat it more like a regular project, in the sense that you have a defined scope and a defined timeline and a set of tasks, and we can say, are we on schedule or are we not? The issue being is it's sort of a discovery process in the procurement to try and figure out, how big is the project, what are the different drivers, and it's hard to nail down a really, tight schedule until you answer some of those questions.
Can I just
Go ahead,
add,
Chris.
actually in September, we'll have, as part of the board report to you, you'll have a dashboard of what the schedules for all of the business renew projects look like, because like Graham said, there's a lot of dependencies between each of them, especially data prep and pension solution. So once we get this schedule kind of solidified in the next month or so, we'll have and part of the annual reporting or the monthly reporting to you will have a schedule on there, so you'll have a baseline, you can see where it's tracking, so you'll have a better view of that.
And it seems to me that we've always been, and I probably won't term this right, but program-driven more than schedule-driven. We want everything to do what we need it to do more than stay on schedule. Correct?
Yes,
Am
and
I correct?
I mean, what Peggy said earlier about, quality over schedule,
Right.
I fully agree with, but that doesn't mean that schedules don't matter.
Right.
So I think there's because what, Chris just said, with all the other moving parts, you have to know when you want to be doing things, just so you don't sort of trip over each other
Right,
at a
right,
minimum.
right. I
So it's
agree.
not that we would say that, you need to get this task done on this date, come hell or high water, and sacrifice quality for it. Definitely not. But we want to have some yardstick by which we can understand, what the impacts are. And if we need to push something out because we want to spend more time thinking about it, that's fine. Let's just plan it and make sure everybody else knows the impacts.
Thank you. All right, Richard?
I agree that quality and functionality over schedule is probably in the trade-off matrix. You want to err on the one side, but back to Paul's point, I think when you start seeing schedule delays, they can become an early indicator of
Right.
problems that are going to really raise their ugly head downstream, and they provide an opportunity for people to jump in earlier and find out what's really going on and what problems exist, what hurdles are being encountered, and what can be done to mitigate those. So I'm not particularly concerned about the schedule delay on an RFP, because that RFP is the critical point that you're going to measure everything back to. Your contract's going to be an extension of the RFP, and when you start holding your vendor accountable for performance as they start the engagement and start building your project, and disputes arise, the RFP is going to be the document you go back and look
Right.
at and say, what did we ask them to build? What did they contractually agree to build? Was it clear? Was it clear what we wanted? And so if the delay is really about getting a good RFP on the street, I think there's value in that. But sort of post RFP, once we execute a contract with the vendor, I would expect our representative on this board to be very concerned about schedule, because slippage in schedule drives cost increases, but it's also an indicator oftentimes of other underlying problems that might not be apparent at the point in time when it's, And then back to the reporting on this, I think Chris said there's going to be more detailed reporting. Is it going to be beyond a simple dashboard of a colored box that says, red, green, yellow, but actually have
Some depth.
where the board members can look at it and really see the schedule delay, not have to do the math in their head, but see, like, this is where we planned, this is where we are today, this is what downstream effects it has for, successor tasks.
To kind of give you a view of all of that and any feedback, direct feedback from your experience, kind of going back to what Jack was saying about the question on governance before. Also, any feedback you want from that, the reporting perspective, I'd love to hear from you on that. We can make sure that that's incorporated, but that's exactly what we're trying to present to you going forward. And I'm glad to hear your comments on the quality over schedule, because really the approach we're taking is it's okay to slip your schedule now when you're developing your RFP, because the stronger your RFP and contract is, really mitigates the risk of schedule slippage when you go into implementation, because you have a solid foundation for the project. So if we are going to slip a little bit in a schedule, now is the time to do that, because it helps mitigate that going forward. So,
Richard, you done?
Just with my other comment that sort of being okay with some schedule slippage now isn't necessarily an indicator that future schedule slippages will be viewed the same way. I think it's something we want to be sensitive to.
Right.
And part of the strategy would be to instill the sort of the management discipline and rigor prior to the contract award, so that the team is already sort of working in that frame of mind. And then it becomes sort of an environment that the contractors are, there's a set of expectations that are set when the vendor walks in terms of, the level of professionalism and, expertise and rigor associated with the project. And you want to have the team fully up to speed and, already operating at that level before the vendor turns up.
yes, but so kind of going back to Peggy's discussion on readiness assessments and what we're doing in your comments on change management. I mean, the year between when we release the RFP and we actually make an award is the change of readiness, is the time for readiness for the organization. And part of that is getting staff ready, not only from a technical perspective, from a change organizational development perspective, but even, what happens a lot of times is you have people participating in projects that have never worked on a project and don't understand what that means and what it means to actually work tasks and deadlines and work in a matrix organization. So we're going to have time to get all the project team members ready on what it's like to work on a project. So when they walk into a project environment that they haven't been into before, it's a little bit more familiar to them and they'll know what's expected and how to work better with the vendors.
All right. Now do we go to data prep?
Data prep now. Okay. So, active work has begun on data analysis. The vendor Sol is actively executing queries against the pension data. The intent being to identify potential quality issues and get a read on sort of the status of the data to support future quality improvement efforts prior to the pension solution implementation. Project schedule has slipped by a month, but it's not a significant slip, and the project team is staffing up. If they are able to stay fully staffed, they should be able to pull back that 1 month pretty easily. The concern we have, and the reason we have the project rated at a sort of yellow plus, is that we see the potential for additional delays if there are two contract staff who are pretty critical to the project right now, as a project manager and a solution architect. Their contracts expire at the end of the month, and if those contracts are not extended before that date, there'll be a gap in service for them, which will have an impact on the project. So that we see as a risk. Obviously, the project team's aware of it and they're working it, but there's a question about whether they can get it done before the end of the month, and that will have an impact, most likely. So our focus will obviously be on monitoring that. But the other thing that we're really going to start looking at now that the actual work is underway, the premise for this project and why it will really be useful to the organization is, as Peggy said when she was up here earlier, it is able to assist in cleansing the data and improving the quality of the data before the pension solution project actually starts. So it doesn't have to deal with a whole bunch of data quality issues during the project. So there's a lot of queries being run on the project, on the data right now, but they're pretty simple ones, fairly sort of mechanistic ones. It will get much more complex and sort of analytical over the next couple of months. And so what we want to be looking at is the information that's coming back from that analysis really going to be relevant to the project? And is the kind of information that's coming back going to really have an impact on the quality of the data, so that we can see a path that the information that's been brought out of this project and then the remediation activities that will start after that, we can see that by the time the pension solution contract is awarded, we get an implementation vendor in there, the quality of the data is going to be materially better for them than it would have been otherwise. And that's really sort of the reason why this project exists. And we're going to be in a position pretty soon to start to, assess whether the kind of data that's coming back is really going to help in that area. So that's really going to be our focus over the summer months. Any questions on data prep?
I don't have anyone in mind. But I have a question. The contracts you're talking about, the contractors, the architect contracts?
Yeah.
I guess if this goes to Jack, was that Cyber and Gartner that we approved today? Or are those contracts?
No,
if
those
they're-
are actually, those are not the large contracts. We have individual contractors, one's for project managers, small individual
Okay. And so we
contracts.
expect to have those renewed prior to the end of the month?
Yeah, they've actually been up to my level for review, and I had pricing questions about them, so I needed
Okay.
some additional documentation.
Okay,
That's where
thank
they
you.
sit.
All right. That was it then?
Okay, so let's move on to enterprise information management. So this is a new project from a reporting perspective. It's been ongoing for a couple of months, but I wanted to give you a sort of an overview of what the project is meant to do, and then talk a little bit about the status. So the idea behind enterprise information management, it's a discipline that's it's really trying to treat information as an asset to the organization, and it's thinking about information and managing information at an enterprise level. So you think of it an asset that you want to manage across the organization, and there's a whole series of sort of concepts here about what EIM can do for an organization, but a lot of it is thinking about where does information come into the organization, how is it created, how is it used, how is it disposed of or archived, to what extent are you reusing data or sharing it across the organization, rather than creating the same data multiple times or storing the same data in multiple places with different formats and so on. It involves creating an information governance structure. So it's a formal mechanism that involves all the parts of the organization in thinking about you've got this concept of sort of owning data, but it's really not ownership, it's stewardship. Sort of who is the individual or organization that has a steward of a particular type of information over its lifetime and is responsible for making sure that that's it's high quality and that there's an end-to-end life cycle perspective on the use of information. It's one of these topics that can be pretty theoretical. And you can spend a lot of time talking about it, and it's sometimes hard to bring it down to earth in terms of what does it really mean. But when it's done effectively, and you can get an organization that thinks about this kind of stuff as an asset, you end up with much more streamlined access to data, and people generally have a lot more faith in the data, that they know, a single fact exists one place in the organization. It's going to be right, and it's going to be kept to quality by certain elements in the organization. And there's usually an infrastructure behind it as well from a technology perspective that allows access to, up-to-date data that's of high quality across the organization in a consistent manner. So there's a lot to it. It's a pretty sort of big topic. The focus of this project is really a starting point for EIM with CalSTRS. So there's a contract right now. Gartner is currently under contract to do an EIM planning and roadmap activity. So the basic scope of the work is to provide education to management and staff about what EIM really is, conduct a maturity assessment. So it's assessing CalSTRS' level of maturity in this area against best practice organizations in general, plus in financial services industry, for example, to identify particular risks around the use of CalSTRS data today, and then to put together a target state vision. So this is how we'd like to see CalSTRS in the future, and a plan for how to get there. The idea being there's sort of an actionable roadmap. There's a series of steps that the organization to take to go from where they are today to a level of maturity that's viewed as the appropriate one for the organization. Project started in February. It's going to run through to July. I'll talk a little bit about what's happened to date and then what the next steps are. So to date, there's a series of training activities that have happened to give some grounding in the basic concepts of what information management is. There has been a maturity assessment completed, so it's looking at these different work streams or disciplines within information management, things like governance and data quality and so on, and where CalSTRS is, against industry best practices. And also defining some of the key risks and opportunities around information management for the organization. The deliverables that are currently in process are a set of requirements and a target plan that defines sort of the state where CalSTRS would like to be in probably like a 1 year and a 5 year window. And then the gaps between that target state and today and a roadmap on how to get there, along with a particular use case. Basically, it's an example of a particular type of information management problem and how EIM could be applied to that. Again, it's this idea of bringing it down to earth and making it somewhat actionable. So our role has been twofold, probably. One is monitoring the schedule. There's been a number of schedule slips over time. So they're trying to sort of maintain that current schedule to finish in July, but also really trying to look at the work products that are coming out and verify that both they meet CalSTRS expectations, but also probably just as importantly, that the recommendations are realistic and actionable for the organization. So this is intended to be the beginning of a pretty long-term process at CalSTRS that will require further investment and further activity over a number of years. And so what we want to make sure is that the work products that come out provide an actionable plan that CalSTRS can really work against, and it doesn't just become one of those documents that goes and sits off on a shelf, which this kind of project can very easily turn into if you're not careful. So that's really sort of our focus. The work product that's sort of currently in draft and being reviewed is the target state plan. So the vision of organizationally and from a process perspective, how CalSTRS would handle information over time, what the governance structure would look like, what kind of changes might have to happen internally to roles and responsibilities, and then what kind of infrastructure might be required from a technology perspective to support that over time. So that's what we're looking at, what CalSTRS is reviewing right now, and that will provide a basis for the roadmap. And that's something that I should be able to report on the next time we get together. I think the roadmap should be either in process or complete. So any questions about EIM?
Richard?
Thank you. So this isn't really a project per se, it's more of a sort of a feasibility study, kind of strategic plan development with regard to this specific thing. But back to schedule. So it sounds like schedule has been an issue across basically every one of these updates in some measure. And I'm just sort of at the end of listening to all this, you all have a lot going on. You have a couple major IT projects, one sort of in the procurement phase, one in the implementation phase. And is there some issue here where there's only so many subject matter experts? You want all your A-team people on every project, and is the breadth of what you're working on, so many things in the air at once, is that causing some issues across these various efforts from your perspective?
It has to some extent in the past, and it's a significant concern for the future. And it's not something that, when the executive team get together, this issue of capacity is a real one that's recognized. Part of the problem is that the organization doesn't have all the tools in place right now to manage this in a very streamlined manner. And Chris can talk to some of the things that the PMO is looking to do in the future around resource management at an enterprise level, which would really help a lot. But I think some of the things like Chris is talking about, bringing back sort of a program level schedule to show how all these projects fit together and the dependencies, that will help somewhat. But what This problem really requires as a pretty detailed understanding of who all the various people are that are required and how that resource loading happens over the next months. And each of the projects is individually putting this information up there. But the challenge is, how do you cross that across the different projects to make sure that you don't have, two projects both thinking they have somebody full-time in September, for example. And that's a challenge that the PMO is well aware of, and maybe Chris can
And an
speak to.
enterprise tool, if you don't have one already, would be yet another project.
We're actually in the process of implementing Clarity's portfolio management tool right now. And we've had a kind of a slow start, again, because of resource constraints just within the PMO. They're working on other projects and trying to do this. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. But we're maturing our project portfolio management process. So we've really strengthened our what we call a project review council, which is made up of director levels or above from each one of the business areas, and any kind of new initiatives that come in now come through a single funnel, if you want to call it that. So we can have a good assessment on anything on the impact of resources. So even new legislation that comes through, they do an assessment of that, and you have to do a priority. If it's something that we have to do that's mandatory, what do we stop doing, or what do we pause to do so we can do other things that are more important? It's really a focus on what our internal priorities are, so we can make sure that the right resources are available at the right time. And we're starting to feel some of from a change perspective, we're starting to feel yes, we have to stop doing some things, or we have to postpone doing some things for a time being so we can have the right resources available to the most critical and most highest priority items for us. So getting the tool in to help manage that data and do some what-if analysis and resource tracking, and that will be very beneficial for us. And that's looking at the end of the calendar year at this point.
So how can the board get sort of that snapshot of when the board's considering new initiatives, or where you are at a point in time? For example, a year from now, when the procurement comes in on the project we were talking about earlier, and then you're going to come to the board and say, we want to execute a very large IT contract with the system integrator so I think it would be helpful if the board would have sort of a view of how you're going to resource these efforts in relation to the other things in flight. I'm getting a little nervous now. There's so many pieces in flight at once that, and if we don't know how all we're allocating all of our resources to staff these various efforts, the risk could spread across multiple initiatives and sort of affect all of them, if it already isn't.
And in September and November this year is when you actually get the sizing of the right sizing of our internal resources. So Chris will be bringing with Robin the budget projection of the actual what labor it takes to support these. That's actually one of the turning points in the discussion, I think, is to show you what it does take to make sure it all gets done, backfilling subject matter experts and all that kind of stuff. So that's what they're doing right now in the building, is going through and measuring each project's needs and bringing that together for a first rough cut in September and a more detailed cut in November.
I guess my recommendation to my colleagues up here is that might be something you want to have a look at on the front end of making a decision to actually launch something else, to kind of see the enterprise-wide impacts and how you're going to resource it. And it's not just about having enough people, it's about having the right people. And like every organization, you only have so many of those critical people that have the depth of knowledge and the program knowledge and the experience that you're going to probably need at various times on numerous efforts. So, and you can only spread them so many ways. So.
And taking advantage of those skills before they retire.
Absolutely. So, thank you.
So that is something you're already considering for us when you come forward in September?
Yes, especially at the program level right now, but ultimately when we have our dashboards that we can come out of the tool once it's implemented, we can give you the full picture. Even in the interim, we may be able to include some of the other higher operational efforts, because it's not just the business or new big projects. There's other critical operational efforts that are eating up resources that we have to really kind of take a view of. So it would be helpful for you to have that. So we'll have that for you in the fall.
Thanks. Are there any further questions? All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Chris. So Jack, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you. We're going to do the first part of Jack's CEO report, and then we will take a 5-minute break and
Let's
then
take
come
about 10
back and
minutes.
finish.
Yeah. Yeah, then this is the best part of the whole board meeting today. So just want you to know that. So you ready?
We're ready.
So on Wednesday of this week, you met some very special members of our system at our 100th year anniversary. So hopefully you all found that to be a really rewarding experience to meet our 100-year-olds as well as our members with over 50 years of service and some of our employees with over 20 years of service. Today you get to meet right now our very special employees who really have had some exceptional accomplishment and recognition here at CalSTRS. And for those of you that were with us last year, our Virtuosity program is a tiered program of recognition. We're very proud of it. It's received, as you know, recognition nationally. And when we now have this in full maturity of the program, and we do quarterly meetings giving recognition to staff. But then once a year, we recognize 13 virtuosos, as we call them. And we put out on your desk actually a small color brochure. You can actually see the 13 individuals recognized here, and I'm going to introduce them to you. Most are here today, and can you load that? And I want to show everyone in the audience too, just kind of how we recognize the staff throughout the year, because we really try and on every floor of the building, have a rotating photography of those 13 individuals aligned with the core value of the organization. And I'm going to introduce each one right here in a minute. But as you can see, we really try and create a special quality about that recognition, presenting that to you. So if I could, and a couple of these individuals you'll recognize because they do come before you, but most you won't. And so I want to actually tell you what they do here so you can kind of appreciate what's going on in the organization. The first gentleman, I don't think Tom is here today, Rich Wine. Are you here, Tom? No. But Tom is a lead START developer system architect for us. So he's working on the system we're talking about here for this last half hour is START. Now our next individual is Julian Figgins. Julian, I saw you want to stand up so everyone sees you. Come on. Julian is our, yeah. Now, this shows you the technical aspects of many of these jobs. Julian is our manager of our business solutions development team. He develops business requested enhancements for START, our system. He's responsible for the development of all of our .NET applications that make START more efficient. And he provides technical enhancements and system preparation related to the annual update of the system. So Julian, thank you. And Cindy Gage, I saw you over there. Cindy, you want to stand up? Cindy, yes, is our most important to all of us in the organization since we rely on our service desk. Cindy is our team lead for the technology service desk. She oversees the daily activities of our service desk processes and workload, and she's responsible for the knowledge base of our service desk and the develop of training plan that we use for all of our service desk staff. Next is Deb Osfeld. Deb is our Senior Information Systems Analyst of our Project Management Infrastructure team. Her responsibilities include the coordination of our priority management processes. And this is actually much of what you were just talking about 1 minute ago. So this is our processes that support the governance, the resource coordination, and assessment of our project work. So she's been involved in she's some background coming from Intel, but helping us really work through a project management prioritization system here. So she's been front and center these last months. Next is Marianne Campbell-Smith, our chief auditor. And of course, Marianne, you do know. And Marianne is all things auditing here at CalSTRS. Elisa's not with us, but next is Elisa Dobbins, and she's our manager of survey research and analysis. And she's been a godsend to the organization. We really do rely on a lot of feedback from customers and staff over our activities to get us to be better at what we do. And so she's brought a very quantitative view of how to do that well, and it's been very helpful for us. Jason Ball's not with us, but he's our team lead. You're back there, are you, Jason? Nope. Jason is our team lead for client technology services and senior information analyst responsible for managing our computing infrastructure and testing new products and applications. And Ian McCarty from our investment office. Ian's primary responsibilities include training and analytics for the mortgage portfolios, but really he's had a very special last year in another way outside his normal duties on the portfolio, and that he was the lead person for the investments branch on the CARM project, which so impacted investments. So we needed a person that could step out of his normal job and dedicate a lot of time on that project, and he certainly had done that for us. Next is Joycelyn Martinez Wade, and there she is. She is our staff services manager. She oversees our legislative bill analyses and enrolled bill reports on our most complex and politically sensitive legislative proposals. She's had a lot of change in her life these last couple months. She, in the right order, she got married and had a promotion here. So she's looking out to a lot of new things. Next is Dave Gerberding, who you all should know. There he is. Dave snuck down from the 15th floor overseeing the board meeting, but he is our lead multimedia producer of communications and really responsible for all of the truly state-of-the-art work that we've done, including the production of the historic video you saw on Wednesday. Next is Tracy Howard. She couldn't be here today, but she's our data processing manager 2 of our quality imaging services. And for the old timers on the board, we went through a massive project. It's been about 7 years, where we imaged millions and millions and millions and millions of documents in the building to get them in our imaging system so that all of our records would be imaged. But the next part of it's the tough part, and that is bringing imaging into some workflow control. And so Tracy's been working with our different areas and bringing that workflow quality into our imaging services. Next is Jody Jackson. Jody, you right there? There you are. Okay. Our senior project manager of communications. She manages the theming and the signage of the CalSTRS headquarters, our member service centers. You'll see that when you go to Santa Clara later in the year. And she is our communications business lead for our retirement progress reports. And then finally, Robin Madsen, Chief Financial Officer. And Robin, of course, has been working at 185% for the last 2 years as we've put CARM and now Business Direct into the organization, but she is all things financial here. So that is our wonderful group of virtuosos for the year.
Let's have them all stand.
All
up
right.
one more time, please.
Awesome, guys.
Thank you so very much for all you do for us. And Jack, this is lovely. Very, very nicely done. We deserve the award we received for this. All righty, let's take a quick 5-minute break.
All right.
And then we'll come back for the rest of your report.